Thriving in today's fast-paced world of change and disruption requires innovation. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast that explores the ins and outs of innovation with raw stories, real insights, and practical advice from the best and brightest in the world of startups and innovation. Each week, we'll bring you the latest ideas in lean startup, design thinking, corporate venture capital, and more. Now, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. This is Josh Berry coming to you today with a follow-up episode. A couple of weeks ago, we had Dan Reed, the managing director of American Family Ventures, on the show. And Dan shared that one of their early experiments into startup collaboration was teaming up with Microsoft's Accelerator arm to do a home automation accelerator. Wanting to dig into that a little bit further, we got a hold of Aya Zook, one of the founding principals of Microsoft's Accelerator team, who's been with them since the inception. We started to dig into a little bit more about their philosophy, some of the things that they've learned and changes that they've made over the years, some of the things that they're looking forward to in the future. Some interesting takeaways from the interview. This idea of they've been really training and incubating and helping to scale up some people that are eventually acquired by a Google or a Yahoo. Or others, and what their take is on that. Also, trying to understand a little bit of their strategy around where they place these accelerators. They don't have an accelerator in San Francisco or New York City. They're in a lot of other emerging ecosystems. And so hope you can sit back and actually, no, don't sit back. Sit up, grab a pen, and start to take some great notes. And I hope you enjoyed this interview with Aya. I want to talk a little bit about your background and how that influences it. You're a product guy coming into this. How does coming at it from a product standpoint influence your interaction with the accelerator or promotion of the accelerator?
I think the accelerator programs and the type of help that is provided has really shifted in the last few years too. I think there was a tendency before to really kind of throw the technical, expertise as one of the bigger benefits. But now, I think with the technical side, there's so many tools, there's so many resources now. Not that everybody's, building off the same set of resources and platforms, but there's a lot more easier ways to build stuff. So I think a lot of the technical aspect of Accelerator kind of falls away, or at least it's not as pronounced. And now it's more about, okay, how do you market this? Or, how does this feel as a product, right? In terms of UI and UX and the design of it, and really the story around it. I think for every, problem where there used to be maybe 3 solutions, now there's 15, right? How do you sift through that? If the product itself, works pretty well across the board, then it becomes the intangibles of, the design and the feel and the background of the founder even. It's like, why is it this person that's bringing this solution, and why should I believe in you? And I think, coming from the product side, it kind of gives me, I think, kind of a bigger perspective than just one aspect of the service itself. And that's what I enjoy, this kind of multidiscipline and taking a 360 look around, what this product is beyond what it does.
Yep. And what is your role?
And so I lead the global marketing team. We have 7 locations around the world for these accelerators, and I work with the local marketing leads.
Okay. So one of the interesting things is we talk to our clients and other listeners of the podcast. Many of them are corporate innovators who are thinking about getting into the corporate accelerator game. What are some of the lessons learned that you guys had early on that maybe you've now become a little bit wiser and better at that some of these people can pick up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, the enterprise or, corporate environment has some inherent challenges when you're trying to especially work with a community of innovators who, tend to work at their own pace. They have their own set of goals that might not necessarily be aligned to the corporate goals. So I think a lot of what we learned was just setting the expectations internally goes a long way if you do it early enough. And that could mean anything from, hey, it's like this is not something that's going to, see fruition immediately. A lot of enterprises or corporations are based on a quarterly goals.
Yeah.
You want to, kind of get out of that bucket and make sure that people are looking at what you're doing as a more of a longer term investment. I think the second piece is, finding those champions inside that understand the space or at least are passionate and can carry this torch for you in terms of, as an exec sponsor or somebody that has wields enough power, has enough sway that can unblock some of the challenges that you're going to run into.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, right? Because presumably many times the corporation, and especially somebody as successful as Microsoft, has a lot to offer these startups who come into their program. Yet one of the main reasons to engage with startups and bring them in is because they're bringing something else to the table, right? In terms of maybe new ideas or new talent or even just sometimes the speed at which they're able to work. How do you ensure that you're bringing the best of your world to these startups in the accelerator, yet still giving them some autonomy, I guess, to create their own identities?
Yeah, that's a really fair point. And, I think especially nowadays in the last couple of years, 2-3 years maybe, the whole entrepreneurship space in itself has seen quite a transformation. I think it's a lot sexier. There's a lot of kind of buzziness around it. And that could also mean distractions, right? Not just in the corporate accelerators, but I think really any accelerator, one of the first messages, at least that we try to get across, I think is applicable to all these type of programs is that you have to learn to say no. And that's always hard, right? Because everybody wants to help you and they mean well. But if you pursue every opinion and suggestion, then, you're just spinning wheels. So I think that's probably one of the harder skill sets that people don't expect to have to hone in on.
Sure. Can you walk us through a little bit of the structure of your program? Some accelerators take a very hands-off approach. Others have a very programmatic curriculum-based approach, and you will get these particular milestones. Some take in early stage, some take in later stage and focus it on scaling. Well, what's the flavor of a Microsoft Accelerator?
Yeah, as we know, the space, the accelerator space has just blossomed like crazy in the last few years. And so there's a lot of competition, even if you have the Microsoft brand behind it. I think, making sure that we differentiate, just like, startups, right? Like what unique qualities do you bring to the table? That's top of mind for us. So, a lot of what we try to focus is on, okay, what can Microsoft do that's truly unique that others might not be able to deliver on? So there's a few attributes, I guess, that we try to promote, to make sure that uniqueness gets across. And, one is we don't take any equity, right? Okay. So we're not the only ones, but I think we're a handful of a few that take this approach. And we also offer $500K in cloud credits, as one of the cloud solution providers. And there's only so many. 2 of them, of the biggest ones, happen to be up here in the Pacific Northwest. So there's some fierce competition around the so-called cloud wars. But also it means that, there's a lot of experts in this one area that, startups can unlock. So one of the ways that, we want to get the startups doing interesting stuff in the cloud is to offer them credits of $500K over 3 years, which is, I think, is substantially more than the typical offer. Then the third piece is, really around, Microsoft was built on this vast partner ecosystem. That's how the company, grew and flourished. And, we want to take advantage of that so-called legacy muscle. And I think every enterprise, is thinking about the innovation space and, how can they work with these kind of up-and-comers and bleeding edge tech. And we have a relationship of some sort with probably almost every company, enterprise, Fortune 500 certainly, around the world. And I think for startups, that are often, they're looking for 2 things, right? They either want a check or they want customers. Then instead of giving them a check, which they have a lot of options of getting from, what if we can unlock customers on their behalf at scale through our enterprise partners? So we think that's a bit of a win-win that's truly unique, and it addresses the needs of really 2 of our biggest, constituents or clients in the enterprise and the startup community.
Yeah, I think that last point is extremely interesting. The breadth of access that you likely have, right? It also probably comes with some other internal issues because you, the Microsoft Accelerator, don't always have control or primary ownership of some of those relationships. How do you navigate some of that? Your rogue band of people over here, and then you've got these corporate development BizDev guys who are over here who are managing those Fortune 500 relationships. Any words of advice of how you can make those teams play well together?
Exactly. Yeah, they're definitely different worlds, and we see a lot of topics get lost in translation.
Yeah.
I think kind of going back to the same point about just trying to set internal expectations. A lot of what we try to do there is, with the corporate development or the more of the account management side of things, we want to make sure that we prep them, remove a lot of the inherent friction, have those two worlds collide, and that's just setting expectations again, and once again trying to find the right people that understand the space and that can credibly engage the startups. It's still a learning process for us. By no means have we perfected it. I think one of the bigger takeaways has been, unless there's that third party involved throughout the process, just doing a matchmaking alone often doesn't get to solutions. And I think there's also the bit of a challenge between big companies like to have a lot of meetings. And the last thing a small company can afford to do is waste a lot of time sitting in boardrooms.
Yeah, we actually, in prep for this podcast, we did a little bit of research and talked to a couple of the startups who've gone through your accelerator. And one of them said that was almost a caution of how can we respect the time. And also because, there's a lot of people maybe internally with whether it's yours or Barclays or other large known accelerators, to also see these startups as maybe something that they can glean from them. And so one of the quotes that somebody gave was, how can we make it so we're not just an internal consultancy sometimes to the other groups?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I call it the petting zoo. Like you never want to be the exotic animal that gets brought in every now and then.
There's some interesting cultural things, though, that start to happen when you bring in and have a separate floor or separate space within your existing campus or building. I've been out to at least the Microsoft campus back in the day, and you guys have so many buildings that are out there, but having that petting zoo near maybe other employees or other things sometimes has some cool cultural effects, I guess.
Yeah, we actually did our first batch of the accelerator on main campus, along with American Family Insurance, which was great. It gave the startups access to a lot of the execs and developers. But I think the bigger learning was, part of being an accelerator program is you're tapping into the bigger ecosystem.
Sure.
And that was a bit of a challenge because the startups were cut off pretty much from the natural Seattle startup ecosystem. So we actually moved the program back into the city, which gives them access to the hub of the startup and innovations, including, companies like Amazon and other, like-minded big corporations that they can, get some feedback and really outside, I guess, perspective from.
So one of the common questions that corporations, as they're thinking about this, always run into, and especially the startups that we work with, always bring up is the IP question, right? So we've got a big companies promoting open innovation. Come in, we're going to collaborate, we're going to help you build your product. What's your stance on the appropriate level of IP protection that either Microsoft or the startup should bring into the engagement versus the frictionless openness of just trying to let innovation and collaboration happen?
Yeah, so from the day one that they get into the program, we're very clear that the IP is 100%, theirs. This is not about, trying to, I guess, glean, what's coming around the curve and, replicating, what they're trying to do. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we're platform agnostic. So this is not about trying to, get them to consume our stack or build stuff that we can use in some different way internally.
Yeah, that's a good point. The interview that we did with one of your startups who got accepted mentioned that he came to the pitch with a BlackBerry phone and Google Docs, and he said the only thing that he had Microsoft, and all of his presentation was a pirated copy of PowerPoint. So that's a good, at least for you guys, of a strong bent towards being platform agnostic and really focusing on, we're trying to look for the next $1 billion idea.
Exactly, right. And, we welcome, OSS. Our cloud solution is certainly built for compatibility with the OSS solutions, and, Linux, iOS, Android, we don't care as long as it's the right solution.
Yeah.
And it's the right team that's building it. And, anything with a platform, I think nowadays especially, is that you can actually go back, and if you put enough engineers and resources and money behind it, you can kind of make that switch, which I think was a lot harder proposition than it was a few years ago. Plus, you got to be respectable where the markets are, where the eyeballs, right? If they're not on Windows yet, then, the company should certainly be going to where everybody's hanging out, which is other platforms.
Sure. So the headline of that is, you're looking for the big ideas, doesn't matter the platform. Maybe don't bring a pirated copy of it. Yeah. But overall, you're pretty agnostic.
Yeah, and I guess the other point is, in terms of verticals, what do we tend to focus on? And maybe, Dan mentioned this too, but with the first class that we did with those guys, with American Family Insurance, we took a thematic approach, right? Mm-hmm. Where we said, hey, we're going to go after like the 10 or 12 handful of interesting companies that are really doing interesting stuff in that one space, which is monumentally harder than doing an agnostic class where you say, we want to find like the 10 coolest startups that we can help. And I think that's another, unique quality, that we bring with this thematic approach. But we also tend to try to go after the more mature startups. And when I say mature, I mean mature in the context of an accelerator, which tends to naturally attract more of the very early stage, even ideation stage. Mm-hmm. But what we learned, and this was a learning process too, but the feedback that we often got from the enterprise customers is, well, these companies are great, but if they're too young, the risk, averse big companies tend to shy away from, betting on somebody so young. And I think it's also an untapped space to some degree, in the accelerator context, in that I think a lot of accelerators, they want to go help the babies and the toddlers, so to speak, right, which need all the help in the world. But, once they hit the teenage years where they have their own personality, they kind of know what they're doing, they don't want help, although they need it. That's kind of the space that we're trying to, I think, tap into, which I think also translates into the Series A crunch, right? Like that's a space to help companies get to the next level. And if we can do that in a unique way, I think that's the best way that we can promote the program and sell it.
Well, I agree. If you're able to get them access to maybe some of those credits, or to accelerate some of the scaling of the product, or access to other clients and other things, you might be able to get them over that hump, or at least get them around needing to get that next bridge to that next hump. So that's good. So I appreciate your candidness in sharing, some things that you tried, some things that you're shifting on. In a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being, we've got this whole startup, collaboration, innovation thing figured out, the book's coming out next week on it, home run, and 1 being, you're still stumbling around in the dark. Where are you guys at in terms of having it all figured out?
If anybody gives you a 10 on that scale, like as a startup, just like any other initiative, especially like a big company, it's a process, right? It's always evolving, and you can have it figured out internally, but by then, the landscape could have shifted entirely, right? So you're always kind of trying to understand what the signals are and trying to adjust. So I would say I would give it a 7 at this point, with the understanding that it's like, hey, it could easily dip down to a 5, or maybe we can shoot at 10. Even without doing a thing.
Well, and I love that answer, in that it gives a lot of hope to the rest of the companies out there, right? If Microsoft, with all your resources, with all the innovation you've been able to do, if you've been at it for a few years and you're still figuring things out, that does provide a lot of hope, right? It's also a good spirit of flexibility and agility, right? Which is exactly what you need in this space. It's what we preach to startups or corporate innovation teams all along, which is you've got certain assumptions and you figure out how to test those assumptions and learn from them and make the next assumptions down the path. So I'm glad you didn't say 10. And you're right. Anybody saying 10 and sending me the book is probably should receive a raised eyebrow.
Exactly.
So anything else you'd like to promote or that we should know about? Any new cohorts or applications you're accepting or any other words that you want to get out to our listeners?
Yeah. So just in terms of, I guess, the achievements to date as kind of a background context. So we have around close to 500 companies that we have graduated. And I think I mentioned earlier that, Seattle's one of 7 programs. Mm-hmm. And we tend to, I think similar to, what you guys are trying to do with the Silicon Prairie is, we tend to go to either emerging or kind of up and coming ecosystems, right? We get a lot of questions around like, hey, why aren't you in the Valley? Why aren't you in New York? The Valley in New York is good. They have a lot of places. Plus it's hyper competitive, which is great. But at some point you reach a saturation point. So I think for us to really make a big impact, we want to get in the ground floor and also, go to places like Bangalore, Beijing, Tel Aviv, which, is pretty mature ecosystem by now, and Paris, Berlin, and London. So those are other locations. And they're more of the kind of like everybody knows they're important, but let's see, how this plays out mode. So we invested pretty early by starting, accelerators in those spaces. And it's really, like going to the places that needs the most help. So that's kind of our philosophy behind it. And, I think Seattle, as, saturated and there's a lot of deep talent pool in terms of, developers and engineers. It really is a bit nascent, given all the brands and the money and the technology swirling around it when it comes to the startup ecosystem. So I thought it made sense for us to kind of take a bet on Seattle and build a program here. And just one more point about the momentum, though. And we've had around 35 exits so far from around a pool of 500. Wow. And some of these acquirers are what are considered our competitors, like Google, Yahoo, Yandex. And we often get the questions like, how do you feel about that? It's like grooming a ball player that gets
drafted to another team. Yeah.
To a team that, you're traditionally rivals with. But, we think that's great, right? I think the more competition there is, it's going to make everybody else more hungry. And it's certainly going to benefit the people on the receiving end of these.
Have you guys acquired anybody who was groomed up in somebody else's program yet?
I'm sure we have as Microsoft. Yeah, but you have to also understand is at what stage are you getting these companies, right? I don't claim to know if LinkedIn ever went through such a program, but acquiring LinkedIn at this stage probably has no bearing on which accelerator they did.
Good point. Aya, if anybody wants to learn any more information about Microsoft Accelerators, where should we send them?
Yes, thanks for asking that. So we have a website that covers how the program works and just a lot of the information around it. So that's MicrosoftAccelerator.com. And you can also follow us on Twitter at MSAccel, MSACCEL.
All right. I really appreciate you being on the show with us today. Look forward to continuing to see what's ahead for the years as you guys continue to get this figured out.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Cool.
And that does it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Special thanks to our guests and sponsors and everyone who makes this podcast possible. Please let us know what you think. Head over to iTunes, give us a review, drop us a note at the IO Podcast on Twitter. We look forward to hearing from you. And in between then, go out and innovate.